there are facts and there's information, and then there's reason and motivation. I think sometimes we grasp, and it's hard to know what happened beyond why it happened, I suppose. And I think it's not necessarily a story that resolves itself with a clear, you can't necessarily know that in the case of, I think part of what this presents is sort of how does the unthinkable come to happen? And there's parts of that we can come to understand and see in portions, but it's still unthinkable. I mean, it's not really something that I think is explainable in that way. I mean, to a certain extent, yes, but to a certain extent, no. And then in terms of move, they are very enigmatic. And, I was able to present through the archival footage pretty much all of the answers that I was able to get in interviews with them. So the idea that they're in support of life, and life being a very open-ended, thing that includes all living things, that they're against the system as they talked about it, and that they believe in John Africa. And in my discussions with them, I never really got beneath that sort of presentation. So I thought that to again present that in full and let, I think to me, in a certain way, I think what Ramona says at the end, or what I should say Louise says at the end, that they're a family, and families from the outside, a lot of families do little things that look weird, but if you grew up in it and it was what you knew, then it seemed pretty regular. And I think that's how I ultimately came to understand them, is as a family. But in terms of the depth of their philosophy, it's something that is difficult to get your head around. It's difficult, if you had Ramona standing here, you would get a lot of similar answers. We're for life, we're against the system, and we believe in the teachings of John Africa. And it kind of, that's what you get. That's what you get. They are, but they're not made available to outside the group. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else?
At what point, if any, did they actually start to fight the fire? That also wasn't clear.
It's about between 45 minutes and an hour after the fire started that they begin to use the hoses. Now, it's not really clear when they actually begin to fight the fire, as opposed to just use them to sort of like contain it on either side. And then the other problem that they have is that they delay long enough that the bunker burns through the roof and falls into the house. And now to effectively fight the fire, they can't just use hoses from the outside. They would have to break down the doors and go in, and they remain afraid to break down the doors and go in out of fear, founded or not, fear that they could be under attack by the MOVE members, whether that's founded or not. That's part of their logic at that moment. There was a woman in the back, I thought. Yes, ma'am.
After people see this, what do you want people to get out of this?
That's, I think it's a film that people bring a lot of their own context and thoughts and background to, and that's sort of welcome. I think it's not a film that lends itself easily to something to go out and do. I don't really expect people to support MOVE or support the Fraternal Order of Police or support, take up a side in this or contribute. I guess what I'm looking for is people to apply it to the things that they see in the present day, and to look around the world more critically and ask questions like, where is violence being done to people with no regard to their humanity, and where are children being used sort of as pawns to manipulate based on the beliefs of adults and the agenda of adults, and sort of being taken advantage of in that way. Just maybe it's sort of indirect. It's not like an activism film in that way. Maybe it means someone reads the world section of the paper when normally they give it a pass, or picks up a different book at the bookstore because they become interested in something not about this, maybe about this, but maybe just related to it or something it reminds them of. So it's sort of open-ended in that way. But I hope, as I screen with different audiences in different places, it's remarkable to me the things that people say it reminds them of that often come from their communities or their parts of the world. And I take that as positive, to the extent that there are unsolved pieces or missing pieces from the puzzle here. I hope that causes it to sort of stay with people and not necessarily, you can't necessarily fit, as the gentleman said, fit the exact pieces to make this puzzle complete, but maybe that causes people to search for pieces to other puzzles and try to complete them on their own.
What brought you to construct all of this footage together to tell such a story?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Philadelphia, so I remember it from when I was a kid. And I guess as a kid, it really affected me, and I was really affected that children died in the house. And I think also as a kid, you lack the context that adults bring to it and ways of understanding it. So, it just was that first issue from the outside world that sort of pierced that shell of childhood and made me realize the world out there, it can be, a bad, unfair place. And that was upsetting as a child. And the fact that kids died in the house was upsetting, and their parents didn't do anything to protect them, or the police who should have protected them were somewhat responsible. So all that affected me, and it sort of stuck with me. And then as I grew up, I found that a lot of Americans were sort of unaware of this history and didn't know about it, and I think that substantiated this idea that it's history that should be known. And then eventually I went to film school and learned a way of communicating that I thought could do justice to the story. And that's how I came to do it.
Why did the people die? Do you know?
Why did they die?
Yeah, I mean, and how did they die? And you just said that they didn't want to protect the children. And I mean, what do you think about their whole thought process here?
Well, I'm not, I mean, it's believed that the children died in the fire. There's some evidence that maybe they got out and were possibly shot back in, or maybe possibly were shot outside the fire and then dragged back in to cover up the evidence. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, and also about the parents not protecting the children.
Well,
that was just brought up. I know they were making a statement, but
well, I guess I feel like, there's a difference between being an adult and an activist and making a choice to make a statement and even risk your own life for that statement. And there's a difference between that and being born into something, and there's a difference in agency there, right? And I feel like the children knew no different and didn't have the same choice to be there or not be there, don't bear the same responsibility that adults bear. So I guess it's my feeling that everyone who was sort of an adult in that city, the authorities, the police, the members of MOVE, the neighbors, everyone but the children bears some responsibility in a society to look out for those that are not empowered at all, which I consider to be the children.
Do you think the MOVE people were aware of what they were doing to the neighbors enough to know what would happen from the neighbors' complaints?
Well, I mean, it was near to the point where there would be...
In terms of the MOVE people's strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it was near to the point where the neighbor, it could have been open violence on the block. I mean, the neighbors were, of course, in retrospect, were more upset with what the police did to the neighborhood, but at the point where they were at a point where they were holding their own press conferences, they were openly pressuring the city to act, and it looked like if the city didn't act, that they might take matters into their own hands. I mean, it was at a breaking point.
What I was trying to ask was, were the MOVE people aware of what they were doing to the neighborhood, and was that part of their strategy?
Oh, yeah, very much so. Yeah.
They wanted, in your opinion, they wanted to precipitate confrontation with the police?
They wanted to draw attention to the situation of their imprisoned comrades, and they were willing to use the neighbors as pawns in that battle. It was their strategy to aggravate the neighbors because they felt, I think rightly, that just sort of doing what we call normal activism, just raising their own voices, was not going to get them listened to. So their strategy was to make a nuisance of themselves so that the neighbors' voices would then get the attention of the city, and the city would have to deal with them. Did they expect how the city would deal with them? I'm not quite sure about that. But
how did the people feel after this all happened? I know like the neighborhood and just the whole community was pretty much crushed through the fire and all that happened. And also, how did the city compensate for all the homes that they took with the fire?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to speak on, for the neighbors as a block. I mean, to a shocking extent, there are statements that, it couldn't have gone, even from people that lost their homes, saying things like it couldn't have gone any other way and things like that. The situation with compensating the neighbors was drawn out for years and years. They rebuilt the houses. They were condemned, as you see in the film. there was sort of a trickle of payouts and settlements and countersuits, and it went on for years and years, I think as late as the early 2000s. I was down there just a couple months ago, and there are people holding out on the block that have refused the settlements, that are living in the condemned homes, that are just like for the most part, the whole block is boarded up, and you have one or two homes, and you go talk to the people, and they tell you how they won't take the money, that they're only going to be satisfied if the city makes them whole again. So there's a whole nother story about that. There's even a kickback scandal, and the contractor that the city hires winds up convicted and doing time, which is, just ironic. So yeah, it's like a scar, It's physically like a scar when you go down there on the block, and then I think for people it is. I'm really interested in, I haven't done this work. Maybe someone will pick up the baton and do it, or maybe I can somehow facilitate it. But I'm obviously really interested in sort of a child's point of view, and Michael Ward in the film, and myself as a child. And it occurred to me somewhere late in the game that there undoubtedly are children around the same age that were neighbors, and they were told to pack a bag for one night. And it strikes me that it would be very interesting to collect the stories of the people that were children and experienced that, as well as the adults, but I'm particularly interested in the children in this case, so I think there's more work to be done.
So what I think is really interesting in your film is that you really begin with this kind of question, is MOVE as a quasi-religious organization or kind of revolutionary political organization, and that really resonates with people in terms of what is fair or appropriate response to them. In your research and your film work, to what extent that question, both the police's and the city's willingness to think of them as a religious organization first and foremost, fit into their decision to deal with MOVE in the way they did?
Yeah, I get your question. Thank you. I'm not sure that we can put a fine point on it in terms of the city's perception of them in that way, but I think there are a lot of interesting notes about that, and I think one of the things that the group is they sort of are habitually defying easy descriptions and easy containers, and I think they do that intentionally. It's interesting, one of the books I read about it does like a deep textual analysis, kind of communication studies look at it. One of the things they do is they look at the newspapers, and the newspapers consistently struggled to put a name on MOVE. What are they? Religion, a cult, this, back to nature. And MOVE would reject, besides maybe religion, MOVE would reject pretty much all of those descriptors, as well as being, a black power group or anything having to do with being like racially based. They would reject and say that's not what we are. But in the newspapers who struggled, what this one author shows is that as you got closer to the confrontation, the newspapers all gelled on a word to call them, and that word was terrorist, right? So this issue of definitions kind of flies around the whole thing. Yeah, I think another thing about the group is that they were very sort of, I think, aware of the different types of freedoms that we're supposed to have in a liberal democratic society, and also how to sort of walk right up to the limit of those things in a provocative way, in a very effective propaganda way. So if it's freedom of religion is a little more complicated, but if you take even freedom of speech, this was one of the things they did, which is, it's my freedom of speech to say my views, but as you were pointing out, is it my freedom of speech to put a loudspeaker on my building and curse everyone out? And then is it my freedom of speech to demonstrate with a firearm? And then it's like, oh, well, no, that's beyond freedom of speech. And then right away, they sort of had a solution for that. And it's like, well, they're not real firearms, they're just props. And I think one of the things that they did was sort of use definitions and sort of these limits or sort of exploring the limits of the freedoms we have in a very provocative way. It makes them very difficult to define. And, I think I've talked to a lot of people, a lot of academics that study religion and religion in conflict and, origin of religion and things like that, really like MOVE as a case study and like to look at it in that light. And I think it's accurate. As I say, at the end of the day, to me, the best thing I could call them is a family. That's what really resonates with me, and that's what they call themselves. I mean, yeah, religion to a certain extent, but if you talk to them, she'll say, members of my family are coming tonight and stuff like that. And I think that's kind of how I feel about them after knowing them for a bit.
In the beginning, you called them a family. Were they actively seeking more members?
Yeah, the numbers and the membership is always somewhat clouded in secrecy. In the sort of more early days, the more the days that you saw, they would often allude to, the move underground and these other members that were somehow more dangerous in a way. Someone I talked to recently said present, and then there's also always this category of move supporters that were different than move members, and these were sort of people that, were allied with them but didn't consider themselves members. So it was always very fuzzy where the limits were and how big the group is, but it seems like at any one time, including present day, they probably have about 50 to 60 full-time members. I would say that they're always actively spreading their philosophy. To what extent they are seeking people to join up with them and actually move into their communal living and stuff, I don't really know. I think that they're trying to win people over, but I don't know that they're looking for joiners so much as supporters and sort of raising awareness of their ideas as opposed to their membership. But I honestly don't really know. And I mean, they're pretty open to people, and especially when they go and do activities, they definitely want attention, if not membership.
Hi. I know other than obvious limits on money and time, what was your decision-making process around not including sort of any historical context? Like what was going on in the late 70s and the early 80s? Yeah. Particularly, there was one quote where somebody in the police force was like, well, we're now armed for this. And sort of what was going on. And that was a distinct thing that was happening at that time in the early 80s. The police forces were becoming more armed and did have more access to weapons. So I just wanted to hear your personal sort of take on why, it was very specific and honed in on just that one application.
Thank you. I think that's a great question, and it's something I've given a lot of thought to, and I think it's, the film is sort of, I think, quite open to criticism on that grounds, validly, both in terms of militarization of the police, and then just more generally the racial history and climate of the country at that time, and the city, specifically things going on in the city. And my thinking was that once you kind of start to go down those roads, it's hard to know how far to go and where to stop, and how to not give sort of a capsule description of something that's very complicated in and of itself. And at the same time, I felt like a lot of that history was a little more available in the library, on the internet, in those places, whereas the history that I focused on, I felt like was really kind of buried and hard to get at. So my thinking was that if people walk out with those questions, those historical questions, that sort of like the first question I got, that's sort of an okay outcome for me if people are then driven to go research part of history that they were not aware of, or it triggers that in them, if they feel like there's a missing piece and it gets them to go look at it. I guess I'm kind of okay with that. I just tried to focus on the stuff that would both work best in a film, and also I thought the same stuff that would work best in a film was also the history that was sort of least available and could sort of trigger the questions that you're saying to go look at and find out about.
So I just wanted to, Jason, I think you did a great job in presenting some of this archival footage, and it looks like you really just found that the commission kind of used as this narrative spine for the film. So I think you did an excellent job with the film and presenting this history. And I think it's interesting because, it's like when you make films and then people ask you questions about the MOVE organization, and it's like you're not really an expert on the MOVE organization, and I don't hear you claiming that. But I think what's really interesting is, I think for us as an audience, what I think is really powerful about this film is you present this piece of history that's not that long ago. Many of us in the room were alive when this happened, And the fact that, a police department of a major city decided to drop a bomb essentially on a house and destroy an entire neighborhood with the threats and the paranoia of them and a couple of their officers potentially getting injured. And then the fact that, this is a potentially unspoken issue of maybe a cover-up or a frame-up of 9 MOVE members getting thrown in jail. But what I think is important for the audience is for us to think about how do we talk about this, what's happening right now in this country, in the United States, when anybody who is deemed radical or thinking outside the box politically, religiously, whatever, you have an entire religion that's being demonized as terrorists by this country across the world. So I think it's really important for us as an audience to take out of this, to take this, and it's not to downplay your work, because what you've done is provided a provocation for us to think about the world we live in today, not in 1985, and how militarized our police department has become with tanks. And NYPD has fighter jets, you know what I mean? So it's like, I think it's important for us to walk out of this film and not necessarily even want to sort of investigate more about MOVE, but investigate about what's going on right now in this country and how the system that they speak about is still at play and is, you know, framing people of color all the time and hunting people of color, you know what I mean? So I just appreciate you providing this work for us to provoke us to think a little bit about right now.
Thank you. I'm with all that. I agree.
I remember that incident, but it felt like, you know, some of the police garb and all seemed like it was, you know, from medieval times. But John, there was very little footage of John Africa, except that one part where he's getting into the car. Was his persona, was he protected by the community in general? Or did he have a public persona?
No, that's accurate. That footage that you see is the only footage I was ever able to find of him, and your conclusion is fairly accurate as far as I could tell, which is especially once the group formed around him, he was, he was protected from the media in most cases. Yeah.
What I took away from the film was like a history of the United States government with American Indians, forcing them villages into a teepee and then setting it on fire. In Vietnam, putting the natives in a house and setting them on fire. And then it seems like any person or group that takes an active stand that is different from the accepted philosophy of this country seems to end up this way. And that's what I'm taking away from the film. And I guess tread lightly, be subtle, and okay, maybe don't tread lightly. Okay.
I'll just comment real quickly that I think it is, as I say, important that people bring their own context to it, and that's sort of the way the film is designed, and different things resonate with different people. One of the things that has been brought up at a few Q&As that resonated with me a lot was the incident on the bridge in New Orleans after Katrina, where the people are shot back. And I mean, so some things will hit you in different ways, but to me, there's a real resonance there with these American cities and water and fire and being sort of shot back by the authorities. That resonates with me, and then issues with our current foreign policy and the drone war resonate with me a lot too. And so this idea that we'll drop bombs from as far away as humanly possible, and there'll be no risk to our troops, but if a few children in a nursery die or a madrasa, it's not that big a deal. So that really resonates with me as well. But I think the point is different things will resonate with different people, and that's, I think, how I intended it. Yes, ma'am?
I don't really have a question. I wound up really crying. I'm an old activist that's tired. I'm an old activist that's tired. I don't want to be an audience. I'm concerned that as much as I love film and as much as I love documentary filmmaking, that it's going to allow us to become complacent and allow us to be more intellectual about something that's real every day when we get up in the morning. Where you are in relationship to the power structure and the frame of reference, which is still white male patriarchy. I'm just gonna say it, because this is getting too neat. We sitting here, I'm just gonna have to say it. I've been trying to be quiet. We are sitting here being very intellectual. Oh, it's about the film, beautiful film. Went and used archives, yes. You know what it did to me? Make me for the first time want to say aloud, I am for the first time in my 58 years ashamed of being an American. And I want to say that it was really disturbing to hear anybody use Malcolm X terms by any means necessary. We need to contextualize. When we do it, it can't be that simple. Oh, I just wanted to put it like this to make it neat. Because if it's neat, it's easier for us to walk out the door, go right back to the lives that we were living, and believe that whatever little piece we're doing is going to make the difference. If you're not ready to do, now I'm gonna say something now. MOVE, I looked at some of what they did. I thought, why would they be in an urban environment doing the kinds of things that they were doing? But they were making a statement. And why would they use descriptors? Because they want us to look at all the ways in which we still comply and hold it up. It's all of us doing this. We're all the system. So at what point do we challenge ourselves and not be an audience and not be viewers and be more active? Right down to grow the food yourself so you'll know what's in it. because that's essentially what they were doing. There was already practice going on. All you did was to remind us, they've been practicing this for a long time, and we've been going for it. Now what? The drones are out there. I don't know about you, but I hear them regularly. It's all happening. So at what point do we make a decision? It is the 150th anniversary of the Gettysburg Address. What was the last thing that Abraham Lincoln challenged us? That a government by the people, for the people, of the people? Who are we? Is that us? What exactly are we doing now? So thank you for that, and actually for getting me like off the chair and back on the damn soapbox.
All right.
You know?
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I was actually there too, as an adult though. And about a mile away, and you could see the smoke, and it was really terrifying.
Yeah.
And the buildup, I think you did a great job
thank you.
of providing the tension amongst everybody in the city, and it's really disturbing to have the commission end up with 3 men all pointing fingers at each other, essentially. I wondered if you'd shown this film with police officers or firefighters or mayors or administrators of cities and what they think they would do in this situation.
Thank you.
And also I wanted just to say that we didn't know they had a bomb before it got dropped.
Right.
We thought, I mean, yes, they were all, geared up with all the, the sort of on the ground, troop kind of stuff. But this is the first bomb that had been dropped since like the Civil War or something. I mean, on an American city.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's exactly right, but
Actually, sorry. But,
I'll take
so-
the question, which is I
Yeah.
haven't really, beyond James Bergauer, who you see at the end, I haven't shown it to police forces or administrators or either the people in authority. So as far as I know, Ed Randell hasn't seen it or Wilson Good hasn't seen it. I would certainly be interested in those things and get those comments, especially publicly. It would be very interesting to me, but they haven't really volunteered to do that, so I can't really twist their arm on that. But it was interesting in Philadelphia. We did a panel. Ramona came down, as well as James Bergauer, and they got into it a little between the two of them. And then someone stood up to sort of defend James, and was actually a friend of his. And so it runs very hot in Philadelphia. And some of the people that are associated with the police, but maybe were a little more nuanced in their thinking, have come out to respond to it. Whereas the people that I think are the most sort of heartless, and I think probably remain rather heartless, have not really, come out to the film yet. So we'll see. We'll see. Maybe. No, not yet. But I appreciate that as well. I mean, yeah, right. Or it's been mentioned, that the film could, be a good, as someone said, a good discussion starter in communities that are in, different types of turmoil. And that was not how I saw the film initially when I made it, but sort of smart people that I have shared it with have said that. So I think it's great if it has that potential, and it's sort of a nice surprise to me that it engenders those types of feelings, as well as the feelings that were also expressed, which I think are quite appropriate. Yeah. Maybe a couple more.
I just like to make a comment, and I guess thank you for, making this film, because as someone who was not alive when this event happened, I think it's really important that I just express that in American history today, taught in public schools system, which is what I'm in right now, there's nothing, this is not taught at all. We don't hear that this existed, we might skim over it. Maybe there's a paragraph in my history book or something about it, but
maybe.
Yeah, exactly, if you're lucky. And I just think that watching this, I didn't know anything about it, right? And so I came with my film group here, and my dad, who spoke earlier, who's like the director of it, basically said that this is an important event, and I've heard a little bit about it from him, but I never knew what happened, and so I think this really opened my eyes to some of the corruption, I guess, that was happening, you know, before I was born. And so I guess I wanted to just thank you. And I mean, I guess encourage you to try to get in touch with some schools and try to like show it there, because this is like really important. And this stuff is just not taught or, you know, talked about in American history, which is, I mean, you skim over everything from Native Americans and how they were treated, and how people of color were treated in, you know, during the civil rights movement and stuff. And that stuff's just not covered. I mean, it's all about bills and the founding fathers and stuff like that. And so it's a very white perspective. And so I think this film is very important, and I just want to thank you for, I mean, making it in general. So yeah, thanks.
Well, yeah. Thank you for your comment. I share a lot of your feelings. It's some of my favorite audiences, or your age audiences, and yeah, we are making an attempt to do, you know, whether it's more touring like this or getting a DVD into all the Pennsylvania schools, or as far as you can go with the funding that allows. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. Someone with the mic, yeah.
Hi, could you just explain what the media reaction was at the time? Was there outrage at all, or did they accept the political line?
Outrage. I mean, it was a blip on the national media. CNN covered it for I think 2 nights, and it didn't seem to get much traction as sort of a scandal. I think, you know, as you study it, you realize, or if you study more broadly this sort of thing, as some of the people I work with do, you know, for something to really stay in the media attention, it needs a constituency that sort of is keeping it going and stirring the pot. And for various reasons, the only constituency that was really going to do that was the group itself. And we've already seen how they weren't really attracting any of the good kind of attention that you would want for that sort of thing. I think the people you might expect, the national black leadership, was really thrown off by this, really didn't know what to do with it, really was just confused by it. You know, it was Wilson Goode on one side, who was very much the image of the people they were trying to promote, and Move on the other side, which was very much not the image of the people that they were trying to promote. And I think they just sort of, Jesse Jackson went to Philadelphia the next day. He went to stand in solidarity with Wilson Goode. He stood behind him on the podium when Wilson Goode gave his statement the next day. So the very people that you would expect to, you know, sort of march on behalf of the 11 people killed just didn't do it. And I think that's a big part of it. And just generally that you just have a very complex story with race right at the center. And historically, as someone reminded us, is our media has not been very good at rendering these things in their complexity. They're better at making a simple ending out of it that makes everyone feel good about going home and having a snack. And this wasn't that. There was no way to encapsulate it and make it easily digestible, so it just didn't get covered, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Just going off of what you just said and what he said, I just want to thank you, because, like, I tell my friends about this and they don't even care. They're like, whatever, who cares? But, I mean, you could have made a movie about anything, but you chose to make a movie about this. And I think these are stories that need to be told that nobody cares. We need to show people that there's more than just, for, like, I don't even know, like Transformers blowing up and stuff. Like, there's I don't know, just thank you.
I agree. I mean, my reaction was very much the same when I was your age. And because in Philadelphia, at least everyone knew, and you shared it. And then I moved away from Philadelphia, and it was like this wake-up call, like no one else has ever heard of this. And so that really freaked me out at right about probably the same age that you are. And yeah, I mean, I agree totally, but it took me a long time to make the film. It took accumulating a lot of privilege to be able to be in a position to make the film, which is just really a double-edged sword. It's a puzzle. And then, you know, it's like this film opened in New York the same weekend as Gravity opened in New York. Which do you think sold more tickets, you know? So it's tough. It's an uphill battle. But yeah, I appreciate your comments, and I hope, you know, especially the young people here are, you know, inspired and, you know, tell your stories and keep hold of it and, you know, be tenacious about it would be my best advice. There's someone in the back with the mic? Yeah.
The thing that really, and that I get the most from it by people's reactions to it, is the idea of American exceptionalism, and whether people are on the right or the left, it's still like a shock. The lady over there said she felt ashamed to be an American. Well, this country was founded in genocide, and it operates for capitalism. But it's not any different than the other country. It's usually those in power will do anything to maintain it. And I still think that people are naive when it comes to being Americans. We're no different than anybody else. And the people on the right will tell you that that's the way it is, and they can even find it in the Bible. But the people on the left act shocked that they're finding these things out. People are just people. And this can happen anywhere.
Thank you. I mean, I very much wanted to make a film that would be challenging to all comers, so I take your comment as validation. This would take maybe 2 more, and I know this gentleman was waiting from way back when, if you still have one. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have contact with Michael Ward? Did you have contact with him in the film?
Yeah, there's a sad postscript to this. Michael Ward passed away about 2 months ago. He very unexpectedly, right on the eve of launching the film, he's 41 years old. He died on a cruise ship in a hot tub. He drowned. By all reports, it's natural causes. He was with his whole family. They were on a family reunion cruise. And so this was shocking, to say the least, right? On the, poised on the verge of releasing the film. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about it, but I haven't really figured out what it all is. I mean, in one sense, this history that already seems so clouded, our best living connection to it is severed. And then it also, gave me personally a lot of pause to think that myself and a lot of people from Philadelphia that follow this story, he came to mean something, to sort of represent something, and we see something in him. But I think we have to question that as well. I watched his videotape a lot. I did interview him as an adult, and met him on one occasion and did an adult interview with him. And but when his passing, it really caused me to ponder, to what extent can you or can you not really walk in someone else's shoes? And I think we can all, like your very first question, I think we can think about his experience, but I don't think we can really know, and I don't think we can really effectively walk in his shoes. So it gave me a lot of pause for thought about sort of the limits to this type of work and just this type of thinking. Like, in a lot of ways, he was alone in his experience, and he died alone, and it's tragic.
Did he stay involved in Move in any way?
No, he was completely separated from the group. His father was not, took him away from it, renamed him, cut his hair, all of that. He had a very hard time adjusting. What struck me the most interviewing him, so he's 13 in the video here. I interviewed him at 33. And what struck me was he was exactly the same. I mean, he was exactly the same. And it really spoke, I think, to damage and arrested development. And I worked with David Schrager, who's the attorney that you see there, who is like our conduit. And when you work with someone very sensitive like that, you hope to have sort of a trusted go-between. And we did for a period, and he sort of vetted us and talked to Michael about his willingness to participate. And then David Schrager represented Michael from the time of the fire to the time Schrager passed away. And when he passed away, I think it was 2006, I lost that conduit to Michael, and it was my personal impression that he would just as soon, never be reminded of this. And so after I lost that conduit, I sort of respected that and never really reached out to him again, under the assumption that regardless of what my work was or whoever considered it good, it really wasn't helpful to him. I didn't expect him to pass away, so I thought there was a chance he might reach out to me, which never happened. I did get a chance to screen the film with Ramona and Pam Africa, and also some of the younger members of the Move family, including a guy by the name of Mike Africa, who I've become quite fond of, and we've become friendly. And he was 4 at the time of the fire, and he wasn't in the house, but he described sort of looking up to the children who were killed in the house as like big brothers and sisters. He also described trying to get back in touch with Michael Ward over the years, but not being able to. And he was, at the end of the screening, he hugged me and he said, you did a good job here. And it really meant a lot to me. And I really felt like in a lot of ways, like he was the person, even though I didn't know him, like he was the person I made the film for, And so it's sort of broadened that whole, people have alluded to their different parts of their philosophy. And I have to say, not so much making the film, but finishing the film and putting it out, like we've become closer, and I think we've reached more of a mutual respect for each other. It's kind of interesting that relationship keeps evolving. It's not static, and I in no way do I disrespect them. I think I have feelings similar to other people's, which is in some ways it's admiration for the purity of their vision, and in some ways just the opposite feeling for the purity of their vision, right? So it's interesting. The gentleman in the white shirt who was waiting very patiently.
Yeah, most of what has been on my mind, I think, has already been said really well. But I guess I'm just curious about like how you make this film, and maybe I missed it, but I didn't hear what you were doing before film school. But like, how do you like know what to do next after you make such a loaded kind of like project, and you create a whole community when you do something like this?
Yeah, I mean, different filmmakers have different, sort of visions for their body of work, and I kind of want to keep doing things that are provocative in similar ways. I'm very interested in social justice issues, and as someone alluded to, my next project actually deals with Arab American activism and an assassination that happened in Southern California. Also in 1985, an activist named Alex Auda was killed, and it's an unsolved murder, and there's a lot of it's got a big emphasis in the Arab American community, but similar to people from the Philadelphia community that hold this close to their heart. If you're not from the Arab American community, you maybe have never heard of it. And it was a colleague of mine at GW who is an Arab American and an activist who had seen my film and brought me this thing that sort of resonated with him in a similar way. Stories we tell around the kitchen table where I'm from, and he started telling me about it. I'd never heard of it. And that struck me, and it struck me that it's another page of this sort of ongoing story of how in this country that is supposed to have these ideals and arguably does better than most, we still seem to dehumanize people based on sort of the outer clothing that they wear all too often, and it leads to violence and injustice. So I'm going to try to keep doing work that fits within that body and keep raising these issues. I think everyone's restless to go, so thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.